I never thought I'd hear those words from my own child. But there I was, standing in the kitchen I'd scrubbed for decades as my son David looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're just a burden now, Mom." In that moment the world seemed to stop. The house I built, the family I sacrificed for, the love I poured into every corner. Suddenly, it all felt like it meant nothing. If you've ever wondered what happens when a mother's love is mistaken for weakness, or when the people you gave everything to decide you're disposable, then listen closely. Because this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself. Before I begin, if you believe in justice, in karma, and in the power of standing up for yourself, please subscribe to my channel and support me. Your likes and comments help me share more stories like this, and I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below, and let's build a community of strong voices together. My name is Margaret and I am 71 years old. I have lived in this house for more than half my life. Every brick, every faded tile, every creak in the floorboards holds a memory, some sweet, some bitter, all precious. This house was my sanctuary, my battlefield, my reward for years of struggle. I was married at 19, a shy girl with dreams of a happy family. My husband Tom was a kind man, but fate is rarely kind for long. He died suddenly when I was just 34, leaving me with a 5-year-old son and a mountain of debt. I remember the day I got the news. I was in the kitchen kneading dough for homemade bread when the phone rang. The world blurred around me as I heard the words, "There's been an accident." I didn't cry then. I couldn't. There was too much to do, too many people depending on me. From that day on, my life became a series of sacrifices. I took a job as a school secretary, grateful for the steady hours and the small salary. In the evenings, I sewed clothes for neighbors, sometimes working until my fingers bled. I learned to stretch every dollar, to make a single chicken last 3 meals, to patch David's school uniforms so many times the original fabric was barely visible. David was my world. I watched him grow from a quiet, serious child into a bright, ambitious young man. He was always top of his class, always polite, always quick to help me carry groceries or fetch the mail. I remember his first day of school, how he clung to my hand, his eyes wide with fear. "Don't go, Mom," he whispered. "I'll be right here when you come back," I promised. And I was. Every day I waited outside the school gates, no matter how tired I was, no matter how many chores waited at home. There were nights when I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood outside, wondering how I would pay the bills, how I would keep the roof from leaking, how I would give David the life he deserved. But every morning I got up, made breakfast, packed his lunch, and sent him off with a kiss on his forehead. "You're my pride, honey," I would say. And he would smile, that shy, grateful smile that made everything worth it. When David was 12, he fell seriously ill. The doctor said it was pneumonia, and for weeks I sat by his bedside, praying, bargaining with God, promising anything if only my son would get better. I sold my wedding ring, the only jewelry I owned, a gift from my mother on my wedding day, to pay for his medicine. I never told David. He never asked why I stopped wearing it. As he grew older, David became more independent. He made friends, joined the baseball team, started spending more time outside the house. I missed him, but I was proud. I wanted him to have the childhood I never had. When he got into college on a scholarship, I cried tears of joy. I remember the day he brought home his acceptance letter, waving it in the air like a trophy. "Mom, I did it," he shouted. I hugged him, my heart bursting with pride. But college was expensive even with the scholarship. I took on extra sewing work, sometimes staying up until midnight to finish orders. I stopped buying new clothes for myself, stopped going to the doctor for my aching knees, stopped dreaming about anything that didn't involve David's future. Every time he came home with a new book, a new pair of shoes, a new ambition, I smiled and said, "Of course, honey. Whatever you need." When David graduated, he got a good job in the city. He wanted to move out to live on his own, but I begged him to stay. "This is your home," I said. "Stay as long as you like." He agreed, and for a while it felt like we were a team again. He paid some of the bills, helped with repairs, even took me out for dinner once a month. I cherished those evenings, sitting across from him in a crowded diner, listening to him talk about his work, his dreams, his plans. Then he met Jessica. Jessica was beautiful, confident, and modern in a way I never was. She wore jeans and spoke with a quick wit. She laughed loudly, made friends easily, and had opinions about everything. David was smitten. He brought her home one evening, introduced her as his special friend, and I knew in that moment that my life was about to change. They married 6 months later, A small ceremony in our living room. I gave them the master bedroom, moved my things into the small guest room, and tried to make Jessica feel welcome. I taught her how to cook David's favorite dishes, showed her where I kept the spices, even let her redecorate the living room. "It's your home now too," I told her. She smiled, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. First, things were good. We ate dinner together every night, watched TV in the evenings, laughed at old family stories. But slowly things began to change. Jessica started making little comments about how I was old-fashioned, how I got in the way, how the house would be so much easier to manage if I just stayed in my room. David, once so loving, became distant. He stopped asking how I was, stopped sitting with me for tea, stopped noticing when I was gone for hours at the market. I told myself it was just the stress of young parenthood, that things would get better. But deep down I felt the shift. The way my presence became an inconvenience, the way my voice was drowned out by their plans, the way my love was taken for granted. When Jessica became pregnant, I was overjoyed. I dreamed of holding my grandchild, of teaching him or her the old songs, the family recipes, the stories my mother told me. I became the full-time babysitter, cook, and cleaner, all while still working part-time at the school. I never complained, not even when my knees ached or my back screamed in pain. But even then, I noticed how Jessica would sigh when I offered advice, how David would roll his eyes when I reminded him to call his aunt, how the house felt less and less like mine with every passing day. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the living room, I overheard Jessica on the phone with her mother. "She's always here," she whispered. "I wish we could have the house to ourselves. David says she'll never leave. She acts like it's her house." I stood there, clutching a towel to my chest, feeling like a stranger in my own home. But I still didn't say a word. I kept cooking, cleaning, babysitting, paying bills, and pretending not to notice the way they looked at me, like I was a piece of old furniture, useful but in the way. I told myself, this is what mothers do. This is what love looks like. But late at night, when the house was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I wondered if I had made a mistake. In giving everything, I had left nothing for myself. I remembered my own mother's words, spoken long ago. "Honey, love is a river. If you give and never let it flow back to you, one day you'll find yourself dry." I brushed the thought aside. David was my son. He would never let me down. Or so I believed. I wish I could say things got better after that night, but the truth is they only got worse. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to mean family dinners and laughter echoing through the house. I was in the kitchen preparing a roast, David's favorite, when I heard their voices in the dining room. They were speaking in low, urgent tones, but the walls in this old house are thin, and I caught enough to know they were talking about me. "She's not going to leave on her own," Jessica said, her voice tight. "We have to do something, David. I can't keep living like this. I want my own life, my own space. I want to feel like this is our home, not hers." David sighed. "I know, Jess, but she's my mom. She's done a lot for me. I don't know how to tell her." Jessica's reply was sharp. "You're going to have to. I can't take it anymore. Either she goes or I do." I stood there, my hands trembling, the smell of rosemary and garlic suddenly making me nauseous. I wanted to walk in and tell them I'd heard every word, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen, like a ghost haunting my own kitchen. I tried to focus on the roast, on the potatoes I was peeling, on the carrots I was slicing, but my mind kept replaying their words. I thought about all the Sundays I'd spent in this kitchen, making meals for my family, listening to David's laughter, feeling like I belonged. Now I felt like an intruder in my own home. I finished preparing dinner in silence, my movements mechanical. I set the table, called everyone to eat, and sat quietly as David and Jessica made small talk about the weather, about the kids' school projects, about anything except the conversation I'd overheard. I forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted like ashes. After dinner, I cleared the table and washed the dishes, listening to the sound of the television in the living room. I could hear Jessica laughing at something on the screen, David's voice low and distracted. I wondered if they felt any guilt, any shame, or if they were just relieved to have finally said out loud what they'd been thinking for so long. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of it all. I thought about Tom, about the life we'd built together, about the promises we'd made. I wondered what he would say if he were here. Would he have let this happen? Would he have stood up for me? Or would he have sided with David, convinced himself that it was for the best? I cried that night, deep, racking sobs that left me exhausted and empty. I cried for the years I'd given, for the love I'd poured into this family, for the home that was no longer mine. But when the tears finally stopped, something inside me shifted. I realized I had a choice. I could let their words break me, or I could take back my life. The next morning, I woke up early before anyone else was awake. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the flower beds choked with weeds, but I remembered when it was beautiful. When Tom and I would spend hours planting tulips and daffodils, when David would run through the sprinklers, his laughter ringing out like music. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the dreams I'd set aside, all the times I'd put David and Jessica first. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings I'd gotten up early to make pancakes for breakfast, the afternoons I'd spent babysitting the grandkids so Jessica could have some time to herself. I thought about the way Jessica looked at me now, like I was a nuisance, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. I thought about the way David avoided my eyes, the way he seemed to shrink away from me as if my very presence was a burden. I realized with a sudden clarity that I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve to be treated like an afterthought, like an inconvenience, like a burden. I deserved respect. I deserved kindness. I deserved a home where I felt safe and loved. I made a decision that morning. I would not let their words define me. I would not let their actions dictate my worth. I would take back my life one step at a time. But first, I needed to survive the days ahead. The days that followed were a blur of routine and tension. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning, cooking, tending to the little things around the house that no one else seemed to notice. I watered the plants, dusted the shelves, and made sure the laundry was always folded and put away. But everywhere I went, I felt the weight of their stares, the heaviness of their silence. Jessica became more distant, barely speaking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. When she did, her words were clipped, her tone icy. She started leaving notes on the fridge instead of talking to me directly. Please pick up milk. The kids need their soccer uniforms washed. Don't forget to lock the back door. It was as if I had become the hired help, invisible unless something was needed. David, for his part, seemed to be avoiding me altogether. He left early for work, came home late, and spent most evenings in his office with the door closed. When we did cross paths, he would mumble a quick hello and disappear before I could say anything more. I missed our old conversations, the way he used to tell me about his day, the way he used to ask for my advice. Now it felt like there was a wall between us, one I didn't know how to climb. The grandchildren, Emily and Jack, were the only bright spots in my days. They would run to me after school, their faces lit up with excitement as they told me about their adventures. Grandma, look at the picture I drew. Grandma, can we bake cookies? Their laughter was a balm to my wounded heart, a reminder that there was still love in this house, even if it was in short supply. But even that began to change. Jessica started scheduling more playdates and after-school activities, keeping the kids busy and out of the house. She signed them up for piano lessons, soccer practice, art classes, anything to keep them occupied and, I suspected, away from me. When I asked if I could pick them up from school or take them to the park, Jessica would smile tightly and say, "Thanks, but I've got it covered." I felt my world shrinking, my role in this family growing smaller and smaller. I tried to talk to David to ask him what was going on, but he always seemed to be in a hurry, always had an excuse to leave the room. One evening, I finally cornered him in the hallway. "David, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked uncomfortable, glancing over his shoulder as if hoping Jessica would come to his rescue. "I'm really tired, Mom. Can we do this another time? Please," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "I just want to know what I did wrong." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. It's just, things are different now. Jessica and I need our own space. The kids are growing up. It's not the same as it used to be." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know things change, David. But this is my home too. I just want to feel like I still belong." He didn't answer. He just walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway feeling more alone than ever. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the boxes I'd kept tucked away in the closet. Old photo albums, letters from Tom, drawings David had made as a child. I pulled out a picture of the three of us, taken on David's 10th birthday. We were standing in the backyard, Tom's arm around my shoulders, David grinning up at the camera, his face smeared with chocolate cake. I traced their faces with my finger, remembering the laughter, the love, the sense of belonging I used to feel. I wondered when it had all started to slip away. Was it when Tom died? When David got married? When Jessica moved in and started rearranging the furniture, the routines, the very fabric of our lives? Or was it something more subtle, a slow erosion of connection that I hadn't noticed until it was too late? The next morning I woke up to the sound of voices in the kitchen. Jessica was on the phone, her voice low and urgent. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. She's always here, always underfoot. David says he'll talk to her, but he keeps putting it off. I just want my own life." Is that so much to ask? I stood in the hallway listening, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a ghost haunting the rooms I had once filled with love and laughter. When Jessica hung up, she turned and saw me standing there. For a moment our eyes met and I saw something in her gaze. Pity maybe, or annoyance, or perhaps just exhaustion. She didn't say anything. She just brushed past me, her perfume lingering in the air. I went about my day as usual, but everything felt different. The house felt colder, emptier, as if the very walls were closing in on me. I tried to keep busy, but my hands shook as I folded laundry, as I swept the floors, as I made dinner for a family that no longer seemed to need me. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, David and Jessica called me into the living room. They sat side by side on the couch, their faces serious. "Mom, we need to talk," David began, his voice formal. I sat down across from them, my heart racing. Jessica took a deep breath. "We've been thinking about what's best for everyone, and we think it's time for you to consider other living arrangements. Maybe an apartment or a senior community. You'd have your own space, your own friends, your own life." I stared at them, not quite believing what I was hearing. "This is my home," I said quietly. "Why would I leave?" David looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "It's just, things are getting crowded. The kids need more space. Jessica and I need more privacy. And well, you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere with people your own age?" I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched. I looked at Jessica, hoping for some sign of compassion, but her face was set, her eyes cold. "So that's it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You want me out?" David finally looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw regret. But then he said the words that would echo in my mind for weeks to come. "Mom, you're just a burden now." The room went silent. I felt the world tilt beneath me, the ground shifting under my feet. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg them to reconsider, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen, numb, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. Jessica stood up, smoothing her skirt. "We'll help you find a place, Margaret. We want you to be comfortable." I nodded, unable to speak. I stood up and walked to my room, closing the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faded photograph of Tom on my nightstand, wondering what he would say if he were here. Would he have let this happen? Would he have stood up for me? I cried that night, deep, racking sobs that left me exhausted and empty. I cried for the years I'd given, for the love I'd poured into this family, for the home that was no longer mine. But when the tears finally stopped, something inside me shifted. I realized I had a choice. I could let their words break me, or I could take back my life. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway, and the distant sound of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass was overgrown, the flower beds choked with weeds, but I remembered when it was beautiful. When Tom and I would spend hours planting tulips and daffodils, when David would run through the sprinklers, his laughter ringing out like music. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the dreams I'd set aside, all the times I'd put David and Jessica first. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings I'd gotten up early to make pancakes for breakfast, the afternoons I'd spent babysitting the grandkids so Jessica could have some time to herself. I thought about the way Jessica looked at me now, like I was a nuisance, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. I thought about the way David avoided my eyes, the way he seemed to shrink away from me as if my very presence was a burden. I realized with a sudden clarity that I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve to be treated like an afterthought, like an inconvenience, like a burden. I deserved respect. I deserved kindness. I deserved a home where I felt safe and loved. But the pain was still raw. I spent the next few days moving through the house like a shadow, doing my chores in silence, avoiding David and Jessica as much as possible. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Every time I entered a room, the conversation would stop. Every time I tried to speak, I was met with sighs or forced smiles. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the hall closet, staring at the boxes I'd kept tucked away for years. Old photo albums, letters from Tom, drawings David had made as a child. I pulled out a picture of the three of us, taken on David's 10th birthday. We were standing in the backyard, Tom's arm around my shoulders, David grinning up at the camera, his face smeared with chocolate cake. I traced their faces with my finger, remembering the laughter, the love, the sense of belonging I used to feel. I wondered when it had all started to slip away. Was it when Tom died? When David got married? When Jessica moved in and started rearranging the furniture, the routines, the very fabric of our lives? Or was it something more subtle, a slow erosion of connection that I hadn't noticed until it was too late? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house. I thought about leaving, about packing my things and disappearing without a word. But then I thought about everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given to make this house a home. Why should I be the one to leave? The next morning I made a decision. I would not let their words define me. I would not let their actions dictate my worth. I would take back my life one step at a time. But first I needed to survive the days ahead. I started by reclaiming small pieces of my routine. I went for walks in the neighborhood, stopping to chat with old friends and neighbors. I visited the local library, checked out books I'd always wanted to read but never had the time for. I treated myself to a slice of pie at the diner downtown, savoring the taste of freedom, however fleeting. I also began to quietly gather information. I researched senior communities and apartments, not because I planned to move, but because I wanted to know my options. I spoke to a lawyer, a kind woman named Linda who listened to my story with compassion and understanding. She assured me that I had rights, that I didn't have to leave my home if I didn't want to, that I was not powerless. Her words gave me strength. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the trees, Emily came outside and climbed into my lap. "Grandma, are you sad?" she asked, her big blue eyes searching my face. I hugged her close, fighting back tears. "A little, sweetheart. But I'll be okay." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, Emily. More than anything." In that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, I would always have the love of my grandchildren. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. But deep down, I knew I needed more. I needed respect. I needed dignity. I needed to take back control of my life. And so, as the days turned into weeks, I began to make a plan. A plan that would change everything. The days after David's words felt like living in a fog. I moved through the house on autopilot, doing the chores I'd always done, but now every action felt hollow. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, felt cold and unfamiliar. The living room, where I'd watched David take his first steps, now echoed with a silence that was almost hostile. Even the garden, my pride and joy, seemed to wilt under the weight of my sadness. But as the initial shock faded, something else began to take root inside me. A quiet, persistent anger. It started as a whisper, a question I'd never dared to ask. Why am I the one who has to leave? Why should I be the one to give up everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed for, just because my presence is inconvenient? I found myself replaying old memories, searching for the moment when I'd stopped being a mother and started being a burden. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up with David when he was sick, the hours I'd spent helping him with homework, the years I'd worked 2 jobs so he could have a better life. I remembered the pride I'd felt when he graduated college, the joy I'd felt when he brought Jessica home for the first time. I remembered the way he used to hug me, the way he used to say, "I love you, Mom." When had that changed? When had I become invisible? One morning, I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the gray light of early morning. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I thought about my life, about the girl I used to be, about the woman I had become. I realized, with a clarity that startled me, that I had spent so many years trying to be indispensable to them, I had forgotten to be important to myself. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinets I had painted, the curtains I had sewn, the table I had saved up for months to buy. This was my home. I had paid every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every repair. The deed was in my name. I remembered the day I signed the final papers, the pride I felt knowing I had given David a stable home. And now he wanted me gone. I stood up, walked to the hall closet and pulled out the box of important documents I'd kept hidden for years. I sat on the floor, surrounded by papers, mortgage statements, tax returns, the deed to the house. I read every line, every signature, every proof that this house was mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of power. I wasn't just a guest here. I wasn't just a burden. I was the owner. I was the one who had built this life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I spent the rest of the morning making a list. I wrote down everything I had done for David and Jessica over the years. Every bill I had paid, every meal I had cooked, every time I had babysat the kids so they could go out. The list was long, and as I wrote, my anger grew. How dare they treat me like I was disposable? How dare they act like I was in the way when I had given them everything? By the time the sun was up, I had made a decision. I would not let them push me out of my own home. I would not let them make me feel small. If they wanted me gone, they would have to face the consequences. But first, I needed to find out exactly what my options were. I started by calling my old friend Linda, who had retired a few years ago but still kept up with everyone in town. Linda had always been a straight shooter, the kind of woman who told you the truth even when it hurt. We hadn't spoken much since Tom died, but I knew if anyone could give me honest advice, it was her. When I called, she picked up on the second ring. Margaret. My goodness, it's been ages. How are you? I hesitated, not sure how much to say. I've been better, Linda. But I need someone to talk to. Someone who'll listen. He didn't hesitate. Come over. I'll put on a fresh pot of coffee. I walked the few blocks to Linda's house, the morning air crisp and cool. Her home was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and the sound of her old radio playing country music. She sat me down at the kitchen table, poured me a cup of coffee and waited. I told her everything. I told her about David and Jessica, about the things they'd said, about how small and unwanted I felt in my own home. I told her about the grandchildren, about the way Jessica had started keeping them away from me, about the loneliness that had crept into every corner of my life. Linda listened without interrupting, her eyes kind but sharp. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Margaret, you've given enough. More than enough. You don't owe them anything. If they can't see your worth, that's their loss. But you don't have to take it. You have rights. That house is yours. Don't let them bully you out of it. Her words were like a balm to my wounded heart. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. I felt heard. We spent the next hour talking about options. Linda suggested I speak to a lawyer just to be sure of my rights. She even offered to go with me if I wanted the support. I promised I'd think about it. On the walk home, I felt lighter. The world seemed a little brighter, the air a little sweeter. I realized I'd been carrying the weight of David and Jessica's disappointment for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. When I got home, I found Jessica in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She glanced at me, then turned away, lowering her voice. I didn't care. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for existing. I went to my room and pulled out the house documents again. I read them carefully, making notes, underlining important sections. I wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. That afternoon, I called a local attorney, a woman named Susan Miller. Her receptionist was kind, and when I explained my situation, she scheduled me for a consultation the very next day. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I dreamed of Tom, of the way he used to hold my hand and tell me everything would be all right. I woke up with a sense of purpose, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could take back control of my life. The next day, I dressed in my best blouse and slacks, brushed my hair, and walked to Susan Miller's office downtown. The building was old but well kept, with a brass plaque by the door and a row of cheerful flowers in the window box. Inside, the waiting room was quiet, the walls lined with framed diplomas and photos of Susan with her family. When she called me in, Susan greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake. She listened patiently as I told her my story, taking notes and asking gentle questions. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression serious. Margaret, you are the sole owner of your home. No one can force you to leave unless you choose to. If your son and daughter-in-law are making you feel unwelcome, that's wrong, but you have the legal right to stay. In fact, if you wanted, you could ask them to leave. I blinked, surprised. I could. She nodded. Absolutely. And if they refuse, you can serve them with an eviction notice. It's not easy emotionally, but legally you are in control. I sat back, letting her words sink in. For so long, I'd felt powerless, at the mercy of David and Jessica's moods and decisions. Now for the first time I realized I had options. I had power. Susan gave me her card and told me to call if I needed anything. She also suggested I start documenting everything. Conversations, incidents, anything that made me feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. It's always good to have a record, she said. I thanked her and left the office feeling stronger, more confident. I walked home with my head held high, determined to reclaim my life. When I got home, the house was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of the television from the living room, but otherwise, it was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I pulled out a notebook and began to write, just as Susan had suggested. I wrote down everything. How Jessica had started leaving notes instead of speaking to me, how David avoided me, how the grandchildren were being kept away. I wrote about the conversation in the living room, about the words that had cut so deep. You're just a burden now. As I wrote, I felt the anger and sadness swirl together, transforming into something new, resolve. I would not let them erase me from my own life. I would not let them make me feel small. That evening I made dinner as usual, but this time I didn't wait for everyone to come to the table. I served myself first, sat at my usual spot and ate in silence. When David and Jessica finally came in, they looked surprised to see me already eating. Mom, you didn't wait for us? David asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. I looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in days. No, I didn't. I was hungry. Jessica exchanged a glance with David, but neither of them said anything more. I finished my meal, washed my plate and went for a walk around the block. The evening air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Over the next few days I continued to reclaim small pieces of my life. I started going to the library again, checking out books I'd always wanted to read. I joined a knitting group at the community center where I met other women my age who understood what it meant to feel invisible. I even treated myself to a new dress, something bright and cheerful that made me feel alive. I also began to quietly prepare for what might come next. I gathered all my important documents, my will, the deed to the house, my bank statements, and put them in a safe place. I made a list of trusted friends and neighbors I could call if I needed help. I even started looking at apartments in the area, not because I planned to move, but because I wanted to know my options. One afternoon as I was sitting on the porch knitting, Emily came outside and climbed into my lap. "Grandma, are you mad at Mommy and Daddy?" she asked, her voice small. I hugged her close. "No, sweetheart. I'm just learning to take care of myself." She nodded as if she understood. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, Emily. Always." That night as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about Tom, about the life we'd built together, about the promises we'd made. I thought about David, about the boy he used to be, about the man he had become. I thought about Jessica, about the woman who had come into my home and changed everything. And I thought about myself, about the woman I used to be, about the woman I was becoming. I realized that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I had survived loss, hardship, loneliness. I had built a life from nothing, raised a son on my own, created a home filled with love. I was not a burden. I was not disposable. I was not powerless. I was Margaret. And I was ready to take back my life. The morning after my resolve crystallized, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel dread pressing on my chest. Instead, I felt a quiet determination. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky lighten through the window. The world outside was still and peaceful, and for a moment so was I. I thought about everything Susan Miller had told me. I thought about Linda's words, about the strength I'd found in the company of other women at the knitting group. I thought about Emily's innocent question, and the way it had made me realize that I was setting an example, not just for myself but for my grandchildren. What would I want Emily to do if she were ever in my shoes? Would I want her to shrink and disappear, or would I want her to stand tall and claim her place in the world? I knew the answer. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and went about my morning routine. But this time I did it for myself. I put on my new dress, the one I'd bought just for me, and brushed my hair until it shone. I looked in the mirror and saw not a burden, but a woman who had survived, who had endured, who was still standing. When I walked into the kitchen, Jessica was already there, scrolling through her phone and sipping her own coffee. She glanced up, her eyes flickering over my dress, but she didn't say anything. I could feel the tension between us, thick and unspoken, but I refused to let it touch me. David came in a few minutes later, looking tired and distracted. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table, barely glancing at me. I took a deep breath. "David, I'd like to talk to you. Alone." Jessica looked up, surprised. David hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, Mom." We went into the living room and I closed the door behind us. I could feel my heart pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "David, I know things have been tense lately. I know you and Jessica want more space, more privacy. But this is my home. I'm not leaving." He looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. "Mom, we just want what's best for everyone. You'd be happier in a place with people your own age, with activities and friends. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I shook my head. "You don't get to decide what makes me happy. I built this home. I paid for every brick, every repair, every bill. I raised you here. I'm not going to let you or Jessica push me out." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "No, David. I'm done being quiet. I'm done letting you make decisions for me. If you and Jessica want more space, you're welcome to find it somewhere else. But I'm not leaving." He stared at me, stunned. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the realization dawning that I wasn't going to back down. "Mom, you can't be serious. Where would we go? We can't afford to move right now." I met his gaze, my voice calm but firm. "That's not my problem, David. For years I put your needs before my own. I sacrificed everything so you could have a good life. But I won't sacrifice myself anymore. I deserve to be here. I deserve respect." He looked away, his jaw clenched. "Jessica's not going to like this." I shrugged. "That's her problem." For the first time I felt a sense of power, a sense of control. I had said no. I had drawn a line. And I wasn't going to let anyone cross it. David left the room without another word, and I heard him and Jessica whispering in the hallway. Their voices were tense, urgent, but I didn't care. I sat in the living room, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb away, replaced by a strange, peaceful certainty. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. A few minutes later, Jessica stormed into the living room, her face flushed with anger. She didn't bother to sit down. "So, you're just going to ignore what's best for everyone? You're going to make us uproot our lives because you're too stubborn to see reason," she snapped. I looked up at her, meeting her glare with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "Jessica, I'm not making you do anything. You and David are adults. If you want to move, that's your choice. But I'm not leaving my home." She scoffed. "You're being selfish, Margaret. You're tearing this family apart." I almost laughed at the irony. "Selfish? After everything I've done for you? After all the years I put you and David first? No, Jessica. This isn't selfishness. This is survival." She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret this." I stood up, my voice steady. "Maybe. But at least the regret will be mine, not yours." Jessica turned on her heel and left the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat back down, my heart pounding, but I refused to let fear take over. I had said no. I had meant it. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. David and Jessica barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was only to ask about practical matters. The kids' schedules, the grocery list, the bills. I answered politely, but I didn't go out of my way to make conversation. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds and trimming the rose bushes, letting the sun warm my face and the scent of earth calm my nerves. As I worked, I thought about all the times I had said yes when I wanted to say no. All the times I had put my own needs aside for the sake of peace, for the sake of family. I realized that every yes had been a small surrender, a little piece of myself given away. But not anymore. That evening I made dinner as usual, but I didn't wait for David and Jessica to join me. I served myself, ate in silence, and left the dishes for them to clean. When Emily and Jack came to say goodnight, I hugged them tightly, whispering, "I love you always." Their small arms around my neck gave me strength. After the kids were in bed, I sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Linda called, her voice warm and encouraging. "How did it go?" she asked. I told her everything, How I'd stood up to David and Jessica, how I'd said no for the first time in years. "I'm proud of you, Margaret," she said. "It's not easy, but you did the right thing. You have every right to stand your ground." We talked for a while, and by the time I hung up, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Inside, the house was quiet. I could hear David and Jessica talking in their room, their voices muffled but tense. I knew this wasn't the end of the conflict. I knew there would be more arguments, more attempts to change my mind. But I also knew I was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. I thought about the confrontation with David and Jessica, about the look of shock on David's face, the anger in Jessica's eyes. I wondered if they would try to change my mind, if they would try to wear me down with guilt or threats. But I knew deep in my bones that I wouldn't give in. The next morning, the tension in the house was palpable. Jessica barely looked at me as she rushed the kids through breakfast and out the door for school. David left for work without a word. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, feeling the silence settle around me like a heavy blanket. But this time it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like space I had claimed for myself. I spent the day doing things that made me happy. I baked a loaf of banana bread, filling the house with the warm, sweet smell of comfort. I called Linda and made plans to meet her for lunch later in the week. I even took a long walk through the neighborhood, stopping to chat with Mrs. Parker, who was tending her front garden, and Mr. Thompson, who was walking his dog. For the first time in a long time, I felt connected to the world outside my family, to a life that was bigger than the walls of my house. When I returned home, I found a note from Jessica on the kitchen counter. "We need to talk tonight, Jessica." I folded the note and put it in my pocket, refusing to let anxiety take root. I knew what was coming. Another attempt to convince me to leave, another round of arguments and guilt. But I was ready. That evening, after dinner, David and Jessica sat me down in the living room. Their faces were serious, their voices carefully controlled. "Mom," David began, "we've talked it over and we really think it's best for everyone if you move out. We'll help you find a place, we'll help you pack, but this just isn't working anymore." Jessica nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We need our own space, Margaret. The kids need their own rooms. You'd be happier somewhere else." I listened, letting their words wash over me. When they finished, I took a deep breath and spoke as calmly as I could. "I understand that you want more space. I understand that things have changed. But this is my home. I'm not leaving. If you and Jessica want to move, that's your decision. But I'm staying." David's face reddened. "You're being unreasonable, Mom. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I shook my head. "No, David. I'm finally making it as easy as it should have been all along. I'm standing up for myself." Jessica stood up abruptly. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice cold. They left the room and I sat there, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I knew this was just the beginning of a new battle, but I also knew I was ready to fight for my place, for my dignity, for my life. That night, as I got ready for bed, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had been through loss, through hardship, through loneliness, and who was still standing. I saw strength in my eyes, a quiet determination that no one could take away. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it. You finally said no." And for the first time in years, I slept soundly, knowing I had chosen myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story so far. But this is only the beginning. What happened next changed everything, not just for me but for my entire family. If you want to know how I stood up for myself, what my son and his wife did next, and how I finally took back control of my life, don't miss part 2. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you'll be the first to hear the rest of my story. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in my place? I read every message and your support means the world to me. Thank you for being part of my journey. Part 2 is coming soon, stay tuned.